Welcome this evening to Showtime's Power Hour. This evening, Bobby O'Connell is our presenter. Bobby is a seasoned Toastmaster celebrating 30 years with the organization this June, and she has also spoken before dozens of non-Toastmaster audiences. Most of her introductions have been awesome, but a few times it didn't go quite as well, and she's had to deal with the aftermath. Tonight, Bobby will share what she's learned over the years about speaker introductions and how you can craft and deliver an introduction that will entice the audience and capture their attention even before you take the stage. Please help me welcome distinguished Toastmaster Bobby O'Connell as she presents Crafting a Strong Speech Introduction. Bobby, take it away.
Thank you, Marilyn, and welcome to all of you. We appreciate your being here tonight. So we're going to talk about speech introductions, but we're not talking about that opening segment of your presentation. What we are talking about is that prepared introduction that you would give to someone else to introduce you to the audience, or the introduction that you might prepare for another speaker shortly before you introduce them to take the stage. Now, let's start by talking about why a speaker introduction is so important. Well, first, it identifies the speaker and just shows them some respect. It helps the audience to settle down a bit and get focused on the stage. Because remember, usually at an event or whatever, we arrive as individuals, and it's kind of important to get the group to sort of coalesce and to be ready to hear the message. And it does put the audience into a mindset where they're able to listen and absorb and focus and, learn from what the presenter has to say. It can also help to get the audience hyped up and a little excited about the speaker and about what they're going to experience in the upcoming time. A good introduction will also show why a speaker is qualified to present on a particular topic. And the credibility increases when praise comes from someone other than yourself, from a third person. An introduction emphasizes why the message is important to the group, and it motivates them to listen. An introduction also can link the speaker's content with the overall theme for the event or occasion. And in a large setting, like a conference or something, an introduction also gives the production crew time to make adjustments to the lights or the sound, or to get ready for any AV cues that are needed. And I think that an introduction is important for an online meeting. And that's because we don't actually get to see the speaker take the stage. So we're missing that visual cue, and the introduction can serve that purpose. And finally, an introduction allows the speaker to get straight into their material rather than the upfront stuff. So I think there are 5 goals for a strong speaker introduction. First, you want to grab the attention of the audience. Second, you need to establish the importance of the topic. And third, you want to establish the credibility of the speaker. Fourth, you want to make sure you're outlining the WIFM, the what's in it for me, for the audience. And finally, you want to set the stage for the speaker to be successful in their presentation. So we're going to jump right in tonight, and I have this video I want to share with you. And so let me get my screen share going. And as we're looking at this video, I want you to think about what you're seeing and what works, what maybe doesn't work. I think it's a pretty good one, but still let's consider what we see. Can you see my screen? Yes, okay. And let me play.
Hey everyone, welcome to Impact Theory. Today's guest is a multiple-time best-selling author with one of the most viewed TED Talks of all time. His talk, which popularized the notion of starting with why, has been viewed roughly 45 million times and translated into 48 languages. The speech he gave on millennials the first time I interviewed him broke the internet, garnering well over 300 million views and making him YouTube's 5th most searched term of the entirety of 2017. His unconventional views have made him one of the most sought-after speakers on the planet and have seen him invited to meet with the leaders of some of today's most important businesses and institutions, including Disney, American Airlines, Microsoft, the United Nations, the United States Congress, and multiple branches of the US military. He is a self-described, unshakable optimist who has dedicated his life to bringing to fruition a world where people feel fulfilled by their work. He is truly helping to shape the minds of the next generation of leaders. He is also helping to shape public discourse through continued contributions to such prestigious media outlets as the New York Times, Wall Street Journal, the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, MSNBC, and countless others. So please, help me in welcoming the man who has been described as a visionary thinker with a rare intellect, the author of Start With Why, Leaders Eat Last, and now, The Infinite Game, Simon Sinek.
Okay, so what did you think? What did you notice? Everyone, whoops, I'm sorry, just
Good to see you too.
so take yourself off mute and let's talk about what we've seen here.
I was kind of hoping I'd get to hear him talk.
So something enticed you about that introduction. What was the enticement for you, Marilyn? What made you want to hear the talk?
Well, obviously the interviewer was enthusiastic, but also his list of credentials it was just staggering. So I think probably anyone who could speak in front of all of those agencies and groups would be worth my while to at least listen to for a little bit. So
Yes.
I think that would be it.
Okay. And I should also add that this particular introduction was just prior to basically a 1-hour interview with this presenter. So what else did you guys notice? I see, Jim, you have your hand up.
Instant credibility.
Awesome. And so how did the introduction establish that instant credibility?
As she just said, the qualifications that he has, the groups that he's talked to.
Yeah, it was pretty awesome. So how about Robin, Lori, Sandra, your thoughts?
Well, I liked that he was introduced as unconventional, which set the stage for me that I'm not going to hear the same old, same old, same old.
Ah, you're right. So that's enticing. That captures your attention, makes you want to hear more.
And that he broke the internet.
Yeah, that was pretty cool. So Robin or Lori, your thoughts?
Yeah, I would say the fact that there were so many people who had so much incredible interest in him made me think that if that many millions of people or whatever wanted to hear what he had to say, then maybe it would be helpful to me too.
Okay. Lori, anything you wanted to add?
I also like the breaking the internet. I wanted to know how you do that.
Yeah. So how long do you guys think that introduction was? And remember, this is an introduction prior to a 1-hour interview. So how long do you think that introduction lasted?
I think it was about 200 to 250 words.
Minute to minute and a half, maybe.
Pretty darn close.
Yeah.
I'm not sure what it translates to in words, but I timed it and it was actually 1 minute and 25 seconds.
Oh,
So
Oh, okay. It seemed long.
it seemed long.
Yeah, I thought it seemed fairly long, but
Okay.
there was a lot of information in it, so it made sense.
And, because it was an online interview, they were able to use the video and stuff. So I in my research for this presentation, I was learning about sometimes a speaker has a prepared video as their introduction, maybe for a conference or something. How do you guys feel about that at a conference? Do you think that works? Sandra's shaking her head. Why are you shaking your head?
I like the personal. Rather than to me, if you have a film, that means you're all full of yourself. I mean, as a Midwesterner, that's how we'd say it. I'd be curious, Robin, are you familiar with Simon Sinek?
Yes, I've seen some of his stuff and
Okay.
read the basics.
I've noticed with people who don't know him, that introduction would have seemed way too long. But for those who know him and anticipate, and they know they're in for a good talk.
Mhm.
Well, I know too that there's and it's been unfortunately it's been around for a long time, but I think it still holds some truth that there's a formula for how long your speech is going to be with how long your introduction should be. It's sort of a balance of the two. And I would think that, especially as Bobby was saying, it's an hour interview, that a couple of minutes on an intro, granted, I think the video probably saves some words and some time there, but I think that would be at least appropriate. Besides that, anybody who can write books and come up with those titles is going to be a hoot to listen to. So,
I was just thinking to the bad speech I heard on Saturday, and that introduction wouldn't have, I would have been like, really? But if it's somebody I'm excited to hear, I think I'm more apt to listening to a longer intro.
Yeah, good points. We will talk a little bit later about how long an introduction should be, but I just want to say this guy nailed it really in terms of rules of thumb for how long an introduction should be for a 1 hour interview. So let's talk a little bit about a framework. So this is one of many possible frameworks that you could use to craft an introduction. But basically, you want to answer 4 questions. And the first question is, why this subject or why this topic? So you start with a bang, maybe pose a question to the audience or have some kind of a startling or staggering statistic or some kind of, alarming fact or an interesting insight, something that will, meet the goal of grabbing the audience's attention. So here's a few examples that I came across. So did you know that there are more shopping malls in America than there are high schools? Or how about, what do you think the most common cause of death is worldwide for children under the age of 5? Or how about this one? Quick show of hands, who believes that XYZ is the biggest issue facing our industry today? So all of those are examples of how you can open with a bang about why this subject. So the second question you should be answering in an introduction is, why this speaker? And here's where you share the speaker's credentials, but only the ones that are most related to the topic and to the audience. Your goal is to establish the speaker's credibility and position that speaker as being the right person, the expert who should be talking about the particular topic. So for example, our presenter tonight is an expert on crisis management and holds a master's degree in public safety from Arizona State University. She has trained thousands of police officer candidates and has authored 3 books on the subject, blah, blah, blah. Now that helps to establish the speaker's credibility. And we actually saw a great example of that in the video clip. So again, the second question is, why this speaker? And the third question is, why this audience? Now here's where you build a link between the topic and the audience. And your goal is for the audience to be able to see how the topic affects them directly. So here's some examples. So as leaders in our community, we are all concerned with XYZ issue, whatever it is. Or how about these legislative changes are going to impact all of us more than most people? Or how about if you need to earn more money next year? All of those things help to create that WIFM, why the audience, how the audience would be touched by this presentation. And then finally, the last question is why now? And this is where you describe the benefit to the audience and build up their excitement. You help them see that WIFM, the what's in it for me. So you might say something like, in the next 30 minutes, you will learn ABC. Or let's get some inside secrets from someone who has been there, done that. Or how about, you've heard about XYZ pain, so now here is the solution. I think all of those things help create that WIFM for the audience and build a case for why this speaker, this topic, this audience, why now? So this is just one framework for a speaker introduction. And you can actually do the steps in a different order if it makes sense. But again, the subject, the speaker, the audience, and why now? So here's another framework that I've found for speaker introductions. And this one includes the setup, the pitch, and the close. So the setup is where you describe the current situation and then give the speaker's name and background. So for example, you could say, good afternoon, thank you for being here. Today, we're pleased to welcome Dr. Daisy Duck, a very special guest from Florida. Dr. Duck is a senior animator with Walt Disney Productions, and her specialty is animatronics. So then you move into the pitch, and that's where you state what the speaker is actually going to talk about and why the audience should care. So you could say something like, today, Dr. Duck will be sharing with us her expert opinion on the impact of animatronics on filmmaking in America. Research has shown that visual bells and whistles help to significantly increase theater viewership and revenues. And finally, then you move into the close. And this is where you just tell the audience what you exactly want them to do. So you might say, with that, I ask that you give your full attention to our presenter, Dr. Daisy Duck. Please join me in welcoming her to the stage, Dr. Duck. And then you would lead the clapping and on she comes. So what about when you are writing another speaker's introduction? So the first thing I would suggest is ask the speaker what exactly they want you to say. And hopefully they'll give you something in writing as a prepared introduction. But if they don't, then you could, look up their biographical information online or look for other speeches that they've done and then notice what was said in the introduction, or reach out to them, contact them, and try and get to know them a little better. And then as you're preparing an introduction for someone, yourself or someone else, you should always consider, what's the purpose of the overall event, and somehow build that, so that it ties to the overall event. And then as well, you want to make sure that you're tying the purpose of the presentation, make sure that's tied in the introduction. And then if it's possible, you might want to include some little surprising detail. So here's an example. Jane Dixon and I met while working together at a dog adoption center. I know she will inspire you to work better with your female students and your dog. So when you're preparing an introduction, basically it's supposed to be a tease for what's coming, the coming attractions from the speaker. But what happens if the speaker gives you this long biography or CV, or their curriculum vitae, I think is how you say it? I say feel free to pull out only the credentials, the key credentials that will help to connect the speaker with the topic and the audience. And what if that speaker gives you that 5-minute video introduction? it might be okay to use it, especially if it's a conference or something. But I would say that that 5-minute video comes out of the speaker's allotted time and does not cause the event to start getting off schedule. So what about if you're introducing multiple speakers? I would say give them each equal time and wait, but don't get too long-winded. Just probably shorten up the intro for each of the speakers. And if you're introducing a panel, then you may also need to explain the format for how the discussion will go. And then you can introduce the panelists all at once in the beginning, or you can introduce them during the program as they are about to speak. So what if you're the speaker and you're given what's called a relay introduction? Now that's where the speaker who's just finishing introduces you as the next speaker. Now, chances are that's probably not going to be quite as enthusiastic of an introduction as you might get from someone else. So I think the first thing I would do would be in advance, I would check with the meeting organizer and see if there couldn't be a host or an MC to actually conduct all of the speaker introductions. But assuming that's not possible, then I think you should just thank that previous speaker and acknowledge them. But then you need to find a way to sort of re-energize and re-engage and refocus, redirect that audience to your presentation. And what happens if the speaker fails to state your name or your speech title? I have seen that happen many, many times in Toastmasters meetings. So I think then it's just up to you as the speaker to sort of work it into your opening. Like tonight, I could have said, good evening, my name is Bobby O'Connell. I'm a 30-year Toastmaster, and tonight I'll be talking about how to craft a strong speaker introduction. Or what if the host or the MC makes a mistake in your introduction? And so maybe you'll be able to make a joke of in some way, like that speaker sounds really exciting, but I actually am, ABC. In any case, you want to just regain control of the situation and make sure you're positioned well for the upcoming presentation. And what if you take the stage, but there's no applause, which happens sometimes maybe in a business environment? You could start by suggesting the audience give themselves a round of applause for being there, or to give a round of applause for the venue or the staff because they're so great, or maybe even give a round of applause for the previous speaker again. And all of these things will sort of help to establish that connection between you and your audience. So I do have a list of tips, and Marilyn, actually, if you could please post the handout into the chat so people won't have to take a lot of notes or whatever. But
It's already there, Bobby.
Oh, okay, I'm sorry. Thank you, Marilyn. So here's some tips for a strong introduction. So first, for a workshop or conference, you as the introducer may want to start by just giving your own name and your role. So tonight, I think we heard Marilyn say, hi, I'm Marilyn Bennett. I'm your Zoom host tonight. Our presenter is Bobby O'Connell. Now, here's where we're going to talk about time. An introduction should be brief. For a 5 to 7 minute Toastmasters speech, 30 seconds is plenty. Maybe 45 seconds if you're including all the information about pathways and how long the speech is and which project, all of that. For a 1 hour speech, the recommendation is 1 to 3 minutes max. And as I mentioned earlier, the video that we saw was actually 1 minute and 25 seconds. And the introduction that I gave Marilyn tonight was 45 seconds. In any case, 5 minutes is probably too long because long intros become boring. It can kill the audience's attention and their morale. And then an introduction should always be warm, sincere. You need to speak loudly and clearly, smile and be enthusiastic in tone and gesture. I love how Marilyn does introductions. I always feel like she's really setting up the speaker well. But try not to read an introduction, and because sometimes it can sound flat or unenthusiastic, and it maybe gives the impression that you're not prepared or you don't know the speaker very well or whatever it is. And notes are okay, but just try and keep them inconspicuous. And then please give the exact title of the presentation, because sometimes the speaker is deliberately including a joke or an innuendo. Just about a week or two ago, I heard a presentation that was called The Most Critical 6 Inches. But they weren't talking about those 6 inches. They were talking about the 6 inches between your ears. I thought that was a really clever title. It got my attention. It made me want to hear what she had to say. And when you're introducing someone, be sure you know how to pronounce the person's name. Practice it in advance. And our current program quality director is Sarah Mayer, and it's spelled M-A-Y-E-R. And I love how she kind of makes a little joke, and she says, my name is Sarah Mayer, like mayor, not like Meyer, like the hot dog. And then you should also always know the speaker's correct title, their role, or their position. And then if there are any facts included in an introduction, I would try and verify the accuracy if you can, because you don't want to be spreading misinformation of some sort. And you'll also want to know enough about the subject so that you can sound somewhat knowledgeable and at least not stumble over any challenging words. Like medical terminology comes to mind. Be sure you can pronounce those kinds of words. And then don't give an outline of what the presentation will be about, but do let the audience know what they'll learn by listening to the speaker. And then we mentioned this before, but don't read someone's biography or CV. Just include those relevant details that, about the speaker's qualifications for this topic. It's also recommended that in general, it's best to avoid using humor because it takes up time, but also sometimes humor can fail. And then avoid using sensitive or potentially embarrassing information without the speaker's approval in advance. So for example, any legal troubles or family or health issues, or maybe there's been, online criticisms or arguments, or anything else that might create a negative image about the speaker that you're introducing. And then please, please avoid cliches. How many times have we heard someone say, without further ado? Just do it. Or how about this one? This speaker needs no introduction. Wrong. Every speaker deserves an introduction. They deserve to be set up for success. But on the other hand, avoid any, exaggerated hype and creating these lofty expectations from the speaker. And don't try to upstage the speaker or go on and on about your relationship with the speaker. It's really about the audience, the speaker, the topic. And then, have you ever seen someone, turn and ask a question of the speaker during the introduction? You're from Arizona, right? Don't do that. It makes you look bad. It makes both you and the speaker potentially seem unprepared. And then I would also say, don't mention that a speaker is recently improving in their presentation skills or compare them to some other previous speaker from the event, because each presenter deserves to be evaluated on their performance that time, not some previous time or not comparing to someone else. Your job as the introducer or the host or the MC, whoever, whatever your title is to tell the audience who the speaker is, why the audience should listen, and then move the show or the program along. And then be sure to invite the speaker to actually take the stage, and then state their name last, because that's the cue for the audience. people naturally want to start clapping when they hear someone's name. But when you're doing the introduction, don't start applauding before you finish speaking, because other people will start applauding as well. And you can drown out important information, perhaps even the title or the speaker's name. And then you'll want to ensure that there's a smooth transition. So as you lead the applause after the introduction, look toward the speaker, wait for them to reach the stage, then shake hands to indicate that you're passing control. So please,
Bobby,
yes.
Sandra
Oh,
has a question or a
okay.
comment. She has her hand up.
Okay. Sandra, go ahead.
You know, one thing that I have been trying to work with in the clubs I'm involved in is getting them not to talk about the project and the path that they're working on and what we should expect. I mean, that's in the agenda. It's your responsibility to know that. And is it really even relevant to what the speaker is saying? So for clubs that insist on doing that, I have the evaluator say that first.
Okay.
Then the person who introduces the speaker, then the speaker. So the boring stuff is before the good stuff.
Okay, good point. And I am one who needs to take that to heart. And I'll show you why a little later, okay? So a couple of final tips. Rehearse an introduction as many times as you need to so that you're comfortable with the introduction. And then finally, be aware that there may be cultural differences. In my research, I was kind of surprised to find out that in Denmark, a short introduction is pretty typical because it's considered inappropriate for a person to draw attention to themselves. However, in countries like India or Nigeria, speakers often prefer to have their various achievements mentioned vividly and grandly during the introduction. So then what happens if you get a bad introduction or something goes wrong in the introduction? First, don't get mad. Just, you're the presenter, you need to remain in control of your emotions, but feel free to amend or add to the introduction that you did get, or even just give the introduction you wanted to have. So for example, you might need to add something like, the title of my speech is blah, 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 or my interest in the subject stems from an experience I had last year, or whatever it might be. Or part of my job as an analyst is to analyze, and it's that analytical experience that qualifies me to be critical of some topic. Or best of all, avoid the situation altogether by giving your introducer a written introduction. And Sandra, I see your hand. Can you come off mute, please?
You led right into my question, which is I had once planned on doing a reading from my novel. It needed the introduction. Otherwise, the whole context was not understood. And of course, she didn't even bother to use it. She used my bio instead. What would you do in that situation? Because it eats into your 5 to 7 minutes if you do it.
That's true. So I guess you'd have to kind of find a way to quickly set the stage the way you needed it to be set up. And that's probably going to be tricky, but I guess that's one of those things that we as speakers, as we become more and more experienced and polished, we get better at it. But again, that written introduction, hopefully the presenter, maybe at the last minute, remind them, you've still got my intro, right? Or whatever it is. What did you do in that situation, Sandra?
I had to, like I've had to in the past when I've given longer speeches, and as I step up to the stage, the person before says, you don't have 20 minutes, you have 2. Have to figure out what you're going to do about it. As the stage had to be said, it was a story from the 40s of a boy who stutters. And this was his situation. And there was a lot of backstory, which I didn't think would be as interesting as the dialogue, because I was working on dialogue. So they had no idea why I wasn't speaking very well when I was stuttering in my
Story.
reading of the novel. And it was, but I'm starting to wonder if maybe it wasn't a cultural thing, because I did give her the introduction and she's from the Philippines, and maybe in her clubs, this is what they're used to. Or like you said, in Dutch, in Holland, they don't like to bring attention to themselves.
Yeah, who knows? Could be. But I guess, maybe that's something that we as speakers need to prepare for in advance. Like, what happens if the introduction gets messed up? We plan for things like what happens if technology mishap occurs or whatever. But I guess we need to think about our introductions as well and how we can quickly recover. Because when we have time, we can come up with a better solution. So, okay, Marilyn.
Yeah, and this was just really the results of just listening to you both. I think something that we forget, because I'm guilty of this myself, is when we do have the introduction, reach out to, in the case of a club meeting, the Toastmaster or who's going to be introducing you, and stress whether or not it's important. I mean, if it's something like, don't skip my introduction, I need that to lead into my speech, because sometimes, surprisingly enough, people forget we're in a communication organization. So yeah, that was just something that struck me as I was listening to you and Sandra exchange those thoughts. So there you go.
Well, now what I do is always have my introduction copied and on my clipboard. And I see the person in the Zoom meeting say, "You got my bio? Well, here it is for your convenience." Again,
There you go.
I paste it in the chat personally to them.
That sounds like an experienced presenter. Okay, so it's time to wrap up my part of this talking here. So basically, there's just a few takeaways I'm hoping that you got from this presentation. And first is that the purpose of a speaker introduction is really to connect the speaker with the topic and the audience. And second, that a good introduction will answer those 4 questions. Why this topic? Why this speaker? Why this audience? And why now? And then finally, a great introduction is brief, it's enthusiastic, you can hear it, it includes only the relevant information, and bottom line, it sets up the speaker for success with that audience. Now, I know we have time tonight, so I thank you for your attention during this, informational part of it, but let's have a little more fun, because I've got some real life examples of introductions that we've recently seen at Showtime meetings. And I'm going to start with myself. So, Sandra, I am prepared to hear what you have to say, because I did exactly what you suggested we don't do. Just 1 second here.
Well, and while she's setting that up, let me just also mention that at Showtime, we do have the evaluator give the purpose of the speech, as opposed to having that all part of an introduction.
We try to, but sometimes the evaluator doesn't get called on.
Yeah, well, there's that too.
Yeah. So here is this less than masterful introduction that I recently had. I think it was in December. So my speech was called The Genderbread Person, and the introduction. Tonight, Bobby is working on a level 3 researching and presenting project in the presentation mastery path. She became interested in her topic after a discussion that occurred in her book club almost 2 years ago. Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Bobby O'Connell as she presents a 6 to 8 minute speech titled The Genderbread Person. So shame on Bobby O'Connell for including all that pathways gunk. And what else do you see about this introduction? I see at least one other thing that I could have done better.
Why was your time in there?
That's part of the pathways stuff.
Oh.
Get rid of it.
I will no longer be including that.
What I do like is that you don't describe what a genderbread person is. We are making some guesses in our heads, which now we want to tune in and hear what you have to say.
You're right. That was intentional. I deliberately didn't want to reveal what a genderbread person was.
What does that have to do for me?
You're right. So I had to get into the presentation before. I was hoping that people would understand why I was doing this presentation. It was actually about all of the flavors of
Pronouns.
gender these days.
Right.
But anyway, and the other thing that I saw is I didn't have my name last. I put the title last. It should be the speaker's name last, because that's when people want to clap.
Yeah, it just bores me. It doesn't get me excited to listen. It doesn't cause me to lean in.
Okay. So room for improvement. So here's another one. Let's see. We had Connie Weiss. She just did this presentation, I think last week. Why do we like our guns? America loves her guns. Why? Tonight, Connie will share her history with guns and an interesting conversation with an Irish gentleman who asked her this question: why do we like our guns? So what do you notice about Connie's introduction?
Very controversial.
Potential.
It's lively. It's a lively introduction. It's not preachy and.
But I find it repetitive for only 2 sentences.
And where's her name? I mean, it's mentioned in the
Yeah.
beginning.
Once, yeah.
It's missing from the end.
Mhm.
Also, it assumes that I like guns. I may be thinking I don't like guns.
You know, and it's funny because Connie, during this particular speech, she deliberately did not take a position one way or another with regard to her feelings about guns or gun control.
Until the end.
And well, even then she said, you
Well,
know,
she invited us to work with her to improve the. Anyway,
the conversation.
I actually was with Lori when I first heard this. I thought she was a gun proponent.
Oh, okay.
I thought that that's where she was going with it, and I was a little bit offended by that. But anyway,
Okay.
but yeah, I mean that's how I heard it. So
Okay.
Her title with the word "we" in it is making the assumption that we all like guns, and that's kind of off-putting.
Okay.
Mhm.
All right, let's go on to another one here.
Couldn't she put in a little factoid in there about, with the growth of gun use in America, or some factoid that makes it, why are we hearing this now?
Yeah, good point. Good point. Jim or Lori, anything you wanted to add about this particular intro? Robin?
Nope, not for me.
Okay, let's move on to the next one then. This one is Trish Blackwelder. So first coined in 1990 by researchers and later popularized by psychologist Daniel Goleman, emotional intelligence is the ability to understand and manage your own emotions, as well as recognize and influence the emotions of those around you. But is EI foolproof? Please welcome distinguished Toastmaster Trish Blackwelder. So what do you think about this introduction?
Well, that's a really long, complicated sentence. That's really hard to follow listening to it.
And it's kind of hard even to read as the introducer as well.
True.
So probably would have been better to break it up into a couple of sentences, maybe.
I like the ending with the question. I did like that, but yeah, that whole first sentence is just kind of like, that's a bit much.
It's almost like
Huh.
saying what the speech will be about. Jim?
Right.
I liked it.
Oh,
I liked how, if you said earlier not to do the L3 motivational strategies, emotional intelligence. And when you were just reading it, you didn't do that. I liked how, though, it started with Trish Blackwelder, missed appointments, and then it ended with Distinguished Toastmaster Trish Blackwelder. That corresponds to what you said. And I had written a note when you were going over this that what about using that speech introduction format? Trish Blackwelder, missed appointments, and ending with missed appointments, Trish Blackwelder.
Oh, like a contest speech
Yeah,
introduction
yeah,
with some more meat in the middle then.
yeah.
So the name, the title, and then the meat. And
The
then,
intro,
yeah.
and then,
Well, that would be potentially another framework for crafting a speaker introduction.
And then they'd have 2 chances to get your name wrong or miss the speech title.
well, if they're doing their job, though, with
Well, I know.
everything else, making sure that.
Okay, so let's move on then to another one. This one was from Jimmy Dent. And the actual intro starts on the 3rd line there, where Jim recently attended an ASQ, American Society of Quality webinar that included opportunities for virtual networking. Virtual networking can be very different from networking in person. Jim will share what he has learned about virtual networking.
I would get rid of the initials ASQ and just Jim recently attended an American Society of Quality.
I would agree with that. Yep, because it's sort of, and does anyone else find it a bit repetitive?
Oh, yes.
Virtual networking, virtual networking, virtual networking,
In
networking.
3 sentences. He used it in
Yeah.
every sentence.
And even the title, you know, part of an introduction includes the title, and we're really not focusing on titles tonight, but I think a title is really key to capturing the interest of the audience. And this one, I'm not all that excited about. But what he did have to say, I found interesting.
He's an
It
engineer.
doesn't- It doesn't tell me why this is important to hear now. It doesn't make me feel included in as an audience person in this topic. It doesn't relate to me. So some work has to be done here, some gymnastics on how does this relate to me? Like COVID introduced us to virtual networking.
Oh, there you go. That would
Yeah.
be a great line. And in fact, that would probably be a great opening line for his introduction, because that immediately makes you realize that, yeah, this is, I'm aware of this, or I've experienced this, you know?
But a lot of us don't know that what we're doing is considered virtual networking. So by just saying, you know, with Zoom, we now have to make connections in new and creative ways. At a recent workshop that Jim attended, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
He would like to bring forward to you what the most amazing things he heard.
Yeah. There's a lot of potential in this particular introduction, but it does need a little polish. Lori, were you going to say something?
And yeah, we don't need to know that it was the American Society of Quality. It could be any
Yeah.
any organization.
Lori's absolutely spot on, because that actually tends to exclude people in the audience. We don't need to know why he found this out. And none of us were members of the American Society of Quality. So
Yeah, but if we're supposed to emphasize the person's credentials, why he's supposedly competent to speak on this topic.
but we didn't need to know the ASQ part, just that he had
This
recently
is
attended a
webinar part.
webinar would be good.
Well, and again, now this could depend on the audience too, because the fact that he's a member of ASQ may be seen by some audiences as a credential that would make him a little more appealing as a speaker. Or perhaps if he was doing this particular presentation at some kind of an ASQ meeting, then it
And I
might,
don't discount
Yeah.
that, but he was at Showtime.
yeah.
He was at a Toastmasters meeting, so.
I'd rather have him say, I learned how to social network with my grandson eating Oreos over Zoom. Something that would have made this, I mean, if he's a member of ASQ and he's presenting to ASQ, then he's just regurgitating what they've already heard.
Yeah.
What's his new spin on this?
And you just put in, you know, that thing about the grandson and all that. That was an example of sort of an interesting little fact or a little tidbit, just something unexpected and interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, I think I have one more, maybe two. Oh, two more. So Kathy Smith did a presentation that she called "This Year It Will Be Different." So her intro was, Kathy was recently inspired and she wants to share this inspiration with each of you, both as a means of accountability for herself and hopefully to pass along the inspiration to each of you to work on the 1 or 2 projects you may have on your someday list. With her speech, "This year it will be different." Please welcome Kathy Smith. Lori, we'll start with you this time. What do you think of this particular introduction?
Oh dear. I thought, well, as far as this year it will be different, and about your to-do list, I think we can all relate to that because they're all things that we've been putting off, and especially at the beginning of the year, and we say, well, I will do this, this, and this, and at the end of the year, haven't done them.
So this introduction does attempt to connect with the audience and give us some kind of a whiff and mote of or create that connection anyway between the topic and the audience.
Yes.
Robin,
And if I remember right, this was a January speech, so the
was.
timing was good. Yeah.
Robin, if you're there, do you have any thoughts you want to?
Yeah, I'm here. I was thinking that, again, it gets into a long sentence with lots of clauses and phrases, and you might go to sleep before you got to the end of it. It would probably be better if she started off with questions, such as, I found, this to be an issue. And have you had this same problem? Or have you ever found that you've got a project that's been on your someday list for forever? And then go on and talk about how I can understand that and I can help you out, essentially.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And she did end with her name being the last words of the introduction. So that's a plus for this particular intro.
Another way you could open it, is, what has been on your to-do list forever? Is that?
Yeah. Yeah.
Thank you, Lori. That's what I was trying to think of.
Well, a question bridges a gap.
Yeah.
So they're always good.
I have to admit that I have been that weird lady that goes around and speaks about turning pathways upside down. And I've been using this introduction for a couple of years and have bored myself. So I turned it around to using key phrases that I use as my anchor or my foundational phrases, like pathways with a purpose. And my title is Coulda, Shoulda, Woulda.
Oh, I love that title.
Yep.
Because I connect with that title immediately.
Yeah, but I agree. The beginning part of this is a lot of qualifiers before we get to the meat.
Yeah.
And I would have put the meat up front, because by now, if you don't, I've learned people will just kind of zone out before you come up.
Yeah. Okay, I think I have
Robin is our beloved grammar Nazi, so.
Okay, here's our last one for tonight. Connie did a speech, I believe in December. It was called "Baby, It's Cold Outside." And the intro was, Connie has a love-hate relationship with the cold and snow. Tonight, she will tell you about childhood memories and the coldest night of her life. Please welcome Connie.
Fantastic.
Love it.
Do you think, in my opinion, she should include her last name? Now, granted, this was at a club meeting, so everybody knew her, but I just, as a matter of, I don't
It
know.
makes it more personable to me to have just Connie.
Oh, does it? Okay.
Well, and
Story.
she could have opened it with Connie Weiss has, and then ended it with Connie, and that would have established her identity.
Oh, I see. Yeah. Yeah. Include the last name up at the top.
At the
But it's
beginning.
on the- But it's on the agenda, so.
Well, it depends on where you're giving it, but yeah, she was at a club.
Yeah.
Yeah,
You
but
know,
Yeah, but not everybody sees the agenda,
I like
especially
that
with
she
Zoom.
kicked off her shoes and she's gonna tell us a story.
Now, and that's the thing about this one that I noticed as well was it says in here that tonight she'll tell you about childhood memories. But instead of the word tell, I'm thinking maybe if she had used the word entertain. Tonight she will entertain you with childhood memories and a story about the coldest night of her life, because then that tells me what I'm going to get out of it, because I'm not really seeing what I get out of it from the intro as it is.
And depending on how serious it is, it could be entertain or share.
Okay, fair enough.
And I don't see the word story in there.
No, I added that word.
Okay. Yeah, I think that's good. Story is good.
So we are almost out of time tonight. We've got like 2 minutes left, so I'm going to stop sharing. And does anyone have any last thing they would like to talk about tonight? Or Marilyn, I guess we can return control. And I frankly, I was not looking at the chat. So was there anything in the chat that we should talk about?
There was not. You're fine.
Okay. All right. So anyone have any final thoughts that they wanted to share?
I liked how practical your beginning was, and the instruction and the step-by-steps and outlines. You gave us a template. I love that. But then you followed it up with having these examples, and we could look at why it was impacting us all differently, for good or bad. And I think that was very effective.
Great, thank you. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you, Sandra. Anyone else? Okay, so you have the handout, and these are things then that you can remember going forward, like try and answer those 4 questions and connect yourself as the speaker with the topic and the audience. And then make, be enthusiastic when you're doing a presentation and give the right amount of information. So thank you all for being here again. I appreciate your attention. And Marilyn, you want to give the little pitch for showtime at the end here?
Well, of course I do. We do want to thank everybody for coming this evening. We appreciate your attendance. And I just wanted to kind of wrap up and say, tonight Bobby gave us some things that we can consider when we have to sit down and write our next introduction. And even if we won't be the author of that introduction, we can always use some of these ideas with what we can offer to the author that we would like to hear. We want to thank you all for coming this evening and encourage you to consider joining us again for either our regular club meetings or our next Power Hour, the 3rd Monday of March. Showtime can't wait to help you find your next super power. Thank you all again for coming.